What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. It's time for my final top 25 of the 2022-23 season. Of course, we are now in 2023, but we're talking about last season. And I've got all the spots filled except for the top two. We still have the national championship, but it's going to be kind of obvious who is one and who is two after we get that game. And I usually jump really the day after the national championship. I usually jump into my way too early top 25 for next year, for 2023. I've already been working on that. It is a challenge. Let me tell you, there are going to be a lot of really good teams this next year. I think it's going to be a very competitive race. Really, if you thought 2022 was competitive and there was a lot of parity, I think 23 is going to be even more so. I didn't get a chance to give my thoughts on the playoff game, so I'll do that really quickly, and then we'll get into the top 25. We start with Michigan TCU. What a game. Really came away with that game just feeling like TCU outplayed Michigan. Michigan, I still think, was probably the better team. The two pick sixes really cost them. And then, you hate to point to the refs, but a couple of questionable calls in that game definitely could have gone the other way, but give TCU credit. They made the plays. They did what they had to do, and we'll see if they can take down Georgia in the national championship. And it was kind of even in the other game, it was like Ohio State. They really looked like the better team. They were so aggressive all night long. Really just came in there with that mindset, and it almost paid off with a win. A missed field goal, and they would have won that game. Georgia, I don't think, played their best. Stetson Bennett didn't play his best game, but overall, just the talent of that team, they had enough to get it done, and Bennett did make the plays on that final drive to give them a chance to win that game. So, really good semifinal games. The best semifinal day we have had since the college football playoffs have begun, and just think we might get. With a 12-team playoff, you're going to see some games like Alabama, Kansas State, or Tennessee, Clemson, but you're going to see more of those really good games as well. It's going to be a mix, I'm sure, and I just feel like it would have been a lot of fun this year. And I think next year, when I'm looking at these teams, the 12-team playoff would look really good in 2023. Not going to get it, though, but we'll talk about 23 next week. We're kind of finishing things up here on 2022, and we'll start at the bottom of the top 25. So I've got Minnesota coming in number 25, and I'm just counting the bowl games as just another game. So just playing out the season, and we're counting those bowl games as an extra game. Minnesota finishing 9-4. UCLA, tough loss for them. To Pitt, they dropped down, and they are 9-4. How about Duke at 9-4? Duke was a big-time surprise this year. No one saw that one coming. Hats off to them. They looked really good in the bowl game, and they finished in my top 25. So does Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was a team that was expected to be, a preseason top 25 team, and it just didn't go that way. But they were still 8-4 at the end of the season. They still played Tennessee really tough. This was a good football team. Just lost some close games early on, and but we're steady. They were a steady team all year, pretty consistent, and they wind up at the end of the day finishing in the top 25. And then there's South Carolina, tough loss against Notre Dame. That was a great game coming down to the wire. I really felt like those teams are pretty even. I know they have 5 losses, but with the schedule they played, I do have the Gamecocks ahead of these other teams. Again, they played a really tough schedule, and you got to give them a lot of credit for the way they finished, even though they didn't win the bowl game. I've got them at number 21. All right, 16 through 20. How about Troy at 12-2? More wins than Alabama this year, in fact. They had a great season. Were able to win their bowl game. I've got them at number 20. Mississippi State at 9-4. A big win for them against Illinois in their bowl game. And I haven't even done a video since the Mike Leach news. So I actually had pre-recorded a ton of videos, and I was out of town before Christmas, and I was not even home when Mike Leach passed away. I know that's old news now, but just such a tragedy. Such a huge influence on the game. We're going to miss him big time. Condolences to everyone that knew him, his family, and all the connections he had in college football. That was definitely a tough one. Gonna miss those interviews that we always got from Mike Leach. But Mississippi State with a big win in their bowl game. Notre Dame, just talked about it. Big win over South Carolina. They move up to number 18. LSU absolutely demolished Purdue. You have to wonder, if they had not lost to Texas A&M, LSU'd probably be in the top 10 in these rankings. But they did lose to Texas A&M, and you have to look at the big picture of the whole season. And they finished with 4 losses. Oregon at 10-3. They got a win over North Carolina to finish things off in their bowl game, and they are up to number 16. Bo Nix coming back next year. This could be a really dangerous team. 11 through 15, Oregon State just kind of stayed steady there throughout the year. Took care of business. They beat Florida. I know it was a Florida team that didn't have much going for them in that game with all the players that were out, especially Anthony Richardson. But they dominated that game. 10-3 finish for them. That seems like it was a long time ago. That was that first Saturday of the bowl games. Florida State beats Oklahoma. I thought they'd probably win that game a little easier, but they did take care of business. They got the win. Kansas State drops to number 13. Really just showed that they can't. It's almost like when you play really good athletes. So you're talking about Alabama, talking about Texas. Remember Texas beat Kansas State. That's when they seem to struggle, just because they don't have the athletes. But if you get a team like TCU, you can beat them because the athletes are not. There's not a huge gap. Kansas State just doesn't recruit at the level of some of these top teams, and I think that's just what I thought. Alabama was just had so much more talent out there, and it showed. Kansas State didn't really compete in that game. They dropped to number 13. USC at number 12. 3 losses versus 4 losses for Utah, but I can't ignore the 2 head-to-head matchups there, so I have to put Utah ahead of USC. USC didn't finish great, but with Caleb Williams coming back, this is going to be a really good team next year, I have a feeling. And then again, Utah, tough loss to Penn State. They lost Cam Rising in that game. And it was close early on, but Penn State had a really big second half, and they were able to pull away. So the Utes, they dropped to number 11. 6 through 10, I've got Clemson at number 10, 11-3. Didn't look great against Tennessee, but boy, Tennessee looked really good, even without Hendon Hooker and their top 2 wide receivers. Tulane up to number 9. You're talking about a team with a win over USC, a win over Kansas State. They belong in the top 10. They really do, and I think they proved it with that bowl win. Washington at number 8, a very sneaky 11-2. They finish off with a win over Texas. This was a team that was very close to being in that playoff conversation. I remember they had the one loss, I think it was to Arizona State, just a fluke loss, really. And if they win that game, it's a different story for Washington. This is a really good team this year. Penn State at number 7. So we knew that they had a loss to Michigan and Ohio State, and then they really hadn't beaten anyone, so we didn't really know just how good Penn State was. But we see them against a good team, a good Utah team, and they show that this was a legit team. And this is a team that is also going to have a lot of hype going into 2023. Watch out for the Nittany Lions. I've got Alabama number 6, so you'll see in a second Tennessee at 5. Again, you can't ignore the head-to-head with Alabama and Tennessee. The resumes are very similar. So I still got Tennessee ahead of Alabama. Alabama was more impressive in their bowl game, but again, looking at the big picture, similar resumes. Tennessee has the head-to-head victory, and then we'll go to that top 5 now. Vols at number 5. And then we have Ohio State at 4, Michigan at 3. I would have probably put Tennessee and Alabama ahead of Ohio State if it wasn't for the fact that Ohio State almost beat Georgia, and because they were so close. They played Georgia tougher than Tennessee, and because they were so close, and because they only had 1 loss in the regular season, even though they did finish with the same record. I've got the Buckeyes there at number 4. Michigan at number 3, talked about it earlier. I feel like they were probably still a better team than TCU, but TCU just played better in that game. They made the plays when they had to. TCU's really good. Michigan's really good. Ohio State's really good. There are a lot of good teams this year, and I don't think the gap between Georgia and everyone else is very big. I think TCU even has a chance in that game, but for 1 and 2, it's going to be whoever wins the national championship. Consider them my number 1 team, obviously, and then the loser of that game will be number 2. So even though TCU would have, if they lost, they would have 2 losses, I would still put them ahead of Michigan because of the head-to-head victory. And so I understand if you want to say, well, look, I think Michigan was still the better team, even though they lost, and they have 1 fewer loss. Yeah, you could say Michigan maybe should stay at number 2, but I'm going to go ahead and say TCU, unless they get blown out, would still be my number 2 team, and Georgia would be number 1. So those are the final rankings for 2022. Again, we'll have our way too early top 25 coming up the day after the national championship. Might have a couple more videos this week as well. I have a couple ideas, and I'll see if I can get to them. But would love to get your thoughts on my top 25. What would your top 25 look like? Give me your thoughts again down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.